Assalamu alaikum everyone. I am Muhammad Tariq and I welcome you all to my YouTube channel. As you all know really well that we are discussing history of English literature in this series. In the previous lecture we discussed Anglo-Norman age, and today we will have some talk on age of Chaucer. So we will definitely try to find out some of the important writings of the age. Then we will see some of the important writers and definitely some important events which were happening at that time and which have their significance even after that. So let's start the video. See, the age began in 1340 and it ended in 1400. So at that time, if we see the historical background, if we see the history, if we see which events were happening at that time, we would see that Black Death, which was a pestilence, which was an epidemic, it was spreading there frequently and continuously, and it was quite detrimental because it had killed almost more than 1/3 of the European population, and it had vanished more than 2 lakh villages, and it was, you can say, economically and socially very much destructive. It has changed everything. People, particularly who were belonging to lower classes, were absolutely demolished due to this because of the social and economical problems. So Black Death is one of the most important incident, one of the most important event of that age. Then if we see, we would definitely see the 100 Years' War, which was happening at that time between England and France. France was quite a rich land, and everyone in Europe wanted to rule France because it was a great land, and particularly because it was situated in Western Europe. And 100 Years' War were particularly, you can say, a series of conflicts where many small battles, many small wars, you can say, were being fought by the two nations time and again. So it had also killed many people. It had numerous social and economical chaos as well. So we would see that these two incidents, 100 Years' War and then the Black Death, has instigated a movement which is known as Peasents Movement. In late 1370s, or you can say in 1380s, there happened a movement. There was a movement which was led by Wat Taylor, was absolutely for all those people who were, you can say, demolished economically and socially and financially by these three things, like Black Death, like 100 Years' War, like taxes were being imposed to the poor. And so Wat Taylor collected many people, and they confronted, you can say, the ruling party. However, Wat Taylor was being killed. He was killed, he was assassinated by the ruling government at that time. But in 1381, Bampton resolved this problem through dialogue, and ultimately, you can say, there was a time when a peace treaty was being signed by the people. So it was, you can say, these were the events which were happening at that time, and these were quite significant and quite important. So if we see the important writers of the age, one which is one of the most important writers of all time, you can say, one of the greatest writers in English literature. We all know really well that Geoffrey Chaucer was not just a poet, he was an author of, you can say, wonders. He had written some magnificent poetic work, and he had given English a new direction, a new dynamic. So, if we look at his age, he was born in 1340 in London. His father was a wine merchant, was a rich wine merchant actually. And he, Geoffrey Chaucer, was quite close to the royal family. He lived there and served there. At the age of 17, he served Elizabeth de Bourgh, who was the Countess of Leicester, who was the wife of Prince Lionel. You can imagine at the age of 17. And then in 1359, or some people say that in 1360, he was in France to help the English army to fight the battle. But he was captured by the French army. Although he was ransomed, he was freed by the army later on because of the King Edward's, you can say, higher authorities were indulged in it. That's why he was ransomed. So, then in 1366, he got married to Philippa Royd. Philippa Royd is a big name. Philippa Royd was the sister of Catherine, who later on got married to, you can say, John of Gaunt. So, John of Gaunt and you can say Geoffrey Chaucer were two big names in this age. John of Gaunt was, you can say, an authoritative person. And he had given much opportunities to Chaucer in bureaucracy, in diplomacy. So, we were talking about his life. He got married to Philippa Royd in 1366. And then he went there to Italy in 1372. He was, you can say, appointed as a controller of customs in London in 1374. He went there to France in 1381 for a, you can say, marriage consolation. He also searched for a French wife for Richard II. It is quite, you can say, humorous, but yes, it is a fact. And then we have seen that he also became the Member of Parliament in 1386. Geoffrey Chaucer became the Member of Parliament for Kent in 1386. He became the, you can say, Member of Peace Commission as well in 1386. He became the clerk of King Richard in 1389. He was, you can say, absolutely a blue-eyed man in front of the royal people. So, if we dig deep into his writings, we would see that there are particularly three periods of his writings. French period, Italian period, and then the foremost is English period. French period begins in 1359 and it ends in 1372. So he was influenced by Italian writers like Boccaccio, like Petrarch, and like, you can say, many others. In 1360, he wrote a book known as Book of the Duchies. In 1360, he wrote, or not just he wrote, but he translated a French poem, Les Romans de la Rose, Les Romans de la Rose, which he had given a new name, the Romance of the Rose. And it was an eminent work of a French writer in 1200s, or you can say in 13th century. So he translated that work. Then in 1369, he wrote a magnificent work, the Book of Duchies. He wrote this book of Duchess in Otto Arena. Actually, he wrote this on the death of Queen Blanche, who was the wife of King Richard. Sorry, he was the wife of John of God. She was the wife of John of God. Maybe she was the first or the second wife of him, because he got married 3 times. So, if we see, then he wrote a book of Duchess. These are the important writings in French period. Then there were some important writings like Complaint onto, you can say, Complaint of Mars. Then an ABC was there, an important writing of French era, and Queen Anelida was also an important writing of French era. And if we see the Italian period, which began in 1372 and it ended in 1385, some of the most important writings were being written by Geoffrey Chaucer at that time. So the first important writing is Troilus and Cressida. See, I will discuss his style at the later part, in the later part of the video. So, Troilus and Cressida was actually a love story between Troilus and Cressida. Although Cressida betrayed Troilus in the later part of the story. So, this was, you can say, a bit of this one. The House of the Flame was also an important poem of this era. Then we could see an important poem like The Legend of Good Woman. The Legend of Good Woman was written, you can say, on women. There were 9 woman legends, stories were being written in this poem. And it was a great, you can say, work. Then there is another important work of this age, of this period, is the Parliament of Fools. It was written after the marriage of Richard II. So it is known as the one of the best occasional verses of all times. So these were some of the important writings in the French era. In the Italian era. And if we see the English era, if we dig deep in the English period of his writings, we would see the most eminent writing, the writing which has changed the dynamics of English literature, the writing which is, you can say, still matchless. It is still, you can say, the best of all times. And before going into the detail, we would see that Geoffrey Chaucer, along with 29 pilgrims, went to the shrine of Thomas Becket. There were 30 people, along with a host who is known as, I think, Harry Bailey. And then there is a canon's human. So it concludes that there were total 32 people. Now if we see the history behind all these Canterbury tales, how it was decided that these tales would be written. Actually, when they were starting their journey towards the shrine of Thomas Becket, they decided that everyone will narrate 2 stories while going, and they have to narrate 2 stories while coming back. Every person will have to tell 4 stories, 4 tales, 2 while going, 2 while coming back. So it made total of 120 tales. And because there were 30 people, excluding those 2 people with the likes of the host and then the canon's human. There were 30 pilgrims, and they have to tell the 120 stories collectively. And it was decided that the one whose story will be most interesting the story of a person, of any person, which will be most liked by everyone, will get a free meal after returning back. So it was quite an interesting start of a magnificent journey. And then, although there were 120 tales, but Chaucer only managed to write 24 tales in his life. And out of those 24, 4 of them were incomplete. So let's talk about those tales. Magnificent work of writing, the eminent work of writing, and it is still a matchless, you can say, work of literature. See, Canterbury Tales were written in heroic couplet, and out of all those 24 tales, 2 tales were like prose. They looked like prose, and they still look like prose. Which one of them is Chaucer's own tale, which is Malby's tale, and the other is Paulson's tale. These 24 tales were depicting the social and the political and the royal characters, like the monk, like the parson, like the miller, like the knight. The important tales were the knight's tale, the miller's tale, the reeve's tale, the wife of Bath. These are important, you can say, tales. The knight's tale was the longest, was the largest of all those tales. However, Chaucer tried his best to write magnificent works. Even then he was criticized by these, you can say, critics. According to some of the critics, Chaucer had written on only famous people, on only royal families, and he was not the poet of common people. He was the poet of royal people. He was the poet of aristocrats. It was quite a big allegation on the big man. So if we see Geoffrey Chaucer's versatility, he was absolutely matchless. He was dramatic in his versatility. He wrote the Book of the Duchess in Otuarima. He wrote the Legend of Good Woman in heroic couplet. He wrote Troilus and Cressida in Rhyme Royal. It tells the whole story, it explains the whole story. He was versatile, he was dynamic, he was diversified. He was different, he was unique, he was something else. Geoffrey Chaucer was, is the greatest writer in English literature. If not the greatest, then definitely one of the greatest. So this was all in his age. He lost his life in 1400 and he was buried in Westminster Abbey, the Poets' Corner, and he became the first man who was buried down there. Then if we see the Chaucer's successor, Chaucerian successors, very important names just come in mind. If we see John Lydgate, then we must have to see the important writer John Skeleton, and Thomas Hockleaf was also one of the important Chaucerian writers. Why they are called Chaucerian? Because they followed Geoffrey Chaucer's style, Geoffrey Chaucer's writing. Actually, Thomas Hockleaf, who was born in 1367 and died in 1426, he followed Geoffrey Chaucer's style, his writings. He knew every bit of him. So he wrote a great book, The Regiment of Princes. It was actually a tribute to Geoffrey Chaucer. Although many other things were discussed in it, but it was a praise to Geoffrey Chaucer. Then there was a book, that the Cupid of Letters. It was published, it was written in 1402. So these were the important writings of Thomas Hoccleve. Then if we see John Lydgate, the you can say the most voluminous writer who has written a lot. He was, I mean, you can say magnificent. He wrote almost 150,000 lines. He was more of a letter writer than a poet. He was very renowned because of his letters. He wrote the book, the Troy book. It contains almost 30,000 words. Then he also wrote the Fall of Princes. It also contains more than 30,000 words. The life of the Pilgrim of the Man. He also wrote a great book of 25,000 words. Then if we see John Skeleton, whose time period was a bit different. He was born in 1463 and died in 1529. He was, you can say, a bit different. He was not even a Chaucerian and not a Petrarchan. See, Petrarch's style was also very famous. Petrarch, an Italian writer, he wrote very, you can say, famous writings, and he was also, you can say, being followed at that time. Even now he is really famous. So Skeleton has its own style. Skeleton had its own style. His very well-known Skeletonic stanza or Skeletonic verse is very well known. And it contains short lines. It you can say has a clever, you can say, repetition, and it looks like you feel breathless when you are reading John Skeleton. He was different. He was, you can say, a man who stood against the royalty. He took his action. He wrote a book, Why Come You Not to the Court? Against Wolsey. Wolsey was a minister in Henry VIII, during the age of Henry VIII, during the era of Henry VIII. Wolsey was the minister during the era of Henry VIII. He was, you can say, the most powerful minister, the most powerful man, even powerful, more powerful than the king himself. So, you can say, Skeleton wrote much against him, and he stood against him. And this was all about John Skeleton's life. He wrote magnificent works. His important writings were there, absolutely, you can say, matchless. Then we have to see the Scottish Chaucerians. Scottish Chaucerians were also quite active, and they have the ability to follow Chaucer and to write much important works. One of the important writers was Robert Henryson. Henryson, whose time period is 1430 to 1506. He followed Chaucer very well, and he had copied his wit, his comic values. And the important writings of Henryson are you can say, the Testament of Cressida, and then the Moral Fables of Acid. And he also, you can say, wrote a tragic end, a tragedy on Troilus and Cressida. So he followed him really closely, Geoffrey Chaucer, and he has also written some important works which we have seen. He was a great writer. Let's move forward now, talk about the second Scottish Chaucerian writer, William Dunbar, who was born in 1460 and he lost his life in 1530. He was a great poet, great writer. He had followed Geoffrey Chaucer. He wrote amazing writings. One of the important writings is the Thistle and the Voice. And the second one is the Mary and the Nightingale. These two were important writings of William Dummer, and he got much fame due to these important writings. Then the last important poet is Gwaine Douglas, who belongs to a very famous Douglas family, and he wrote amazing works. His important works are King Heart and The Police of Humor. So he also was a great poet. He followed Geoffrey Chaucer really well. Now let's sum up the age in few words. There were great events which were happening at that time. Some great writers were there. Some great writings were there. Actually, it was the age of Geoffrey Chaucer. Geoffrey Chaucer, who changed English language completely, who changed English literature completely, and his influence at that time and even now is humongous. He was absolutely brilliant. And so I would definitely finish my video on one of his quotations from Monk's Tale, that if gold rusts, what shall the iron do? So this was all in this video from my side. If you have liked it, please like the video, share the video, and subscribe the channel. Thanks a lot, goodbye, and good luck until next time.